At 2:00 a.m., Tokyo didn't hear the bombers. It felt them. A low tremor rolled across the city, windows rattled, dogs began to howl, and a strange, growing vibration pulsed through the night air. People stepped outside, looking up into the darkness. But what was coming wasn't visible. Not yet, because 334 silver giants were flying higher, farther, and deadlier than anything Japan believed was even possible. And in the next few hours, Japan would learn a brutal truth. The war in the air was already lost. Before we continue, hit like, tap subscribe, and turn on notifications. This channel brings forgotten history back to life. Now let's step into the night Tokyo will never forget. The mission began far from Japan, on the remote islands of the Marianas, where America had built something Japan never expected. Airfields capable of launching fleets of long-range B-29 Superfortresses straight into the Japanese homeland. For months, Japan had told its citizens, "No enemy bomber will ever reach our capital." Their entire defense strategy depended on it. Tokyo was supposed to be untouchable, shielded by the vast Pacific. But on this night, that illusion shattered. Just before midnight, ground crews loaded the B-29s. Bomb racks clanged shut. Engines coughed smoke. Pilots climbed into cockpits with faces hardened by exhaustion and responsibility. Because the B-29 wasn't just another bomber, it was the most advanced aircraft in the world. Pressurized cabins, remote-controlled gun turrets, engines that pushed the limits of technology and sanity. And tonight, 334 of them were about to fly directly into the heart of an empire. As they lifted off one by one, the island rumbled like a living machine. Flames from the runways reflected off metal skins. Waves crashed in the darkness beyond the cliffs. Every man knew the stakes. This wasn't just another mission. This was the operation that would decide whether Japan could continue the war or collapse under the weight of American air power. Hours passed. Engines droned. The bombers climbed above the clouds, their formation stretching like a ghostly highway across the Pacific. Inside the cockpits, the tension was suffocating. Ice froze on oxygen masks. Gunners scanned the sky, fingers hovering over triggers, knowing Japanese night fighters could strike at any moment. But something strange happened. They didn't. Japan's once proud Air Force, the same force that shocked the world at Pearl Harbor, was nowhere to be found. Fuel shortages, destroyed airfields, inexperienced pilots. No radar network strong enough to track the incoming wave. Tokyo was exposed, defenseless, and the Americans were closing in. At 1:47 a.m., the coastline of Japan appeared beneath the clouds, a black shadow stretching endlessly. One pilot whispered into his mask, "This is it, boys." Tokyo lay ahead, sleeping quietly, completely unaware that 334 B-29s were about to rewrite the course of the war. The bombers crossed the coastline like silent ghosts, their engines muffled by altitude and distance. Below them lay the dark outline of Japan, dotted with faint lights, villages, factories, military posts, each unaware of what was descending from the sky. In the lead aircraft, Brigadier General Thomas Power adjusted his oxygen mask and checked his instruments. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every man in the formation knew the gravity of the moment. Tokyo was the heartbeat of the Japanese Empire. And tonight, they were about to strike directly at its chest. At 2:03 a.m., the first radar operators in Tokyo caught something. A flicker, a pulse, a distortion on the screen. They leaned closer. Their hands shook. The shapes were too many, too high, too fast. By the time they reported it to their officers, the bombers were already overhead. Inside Tokyo, the streets were quiet. Lamps glowed faintly behind shoji paper walls. Senior officials slept in offices buried beneath maps of a war already slipping from their control. Civilians slept shoulder to shoulder in wooden homes that would burn like dry leaves if even a spark found them. But it wasn't sparks that were coming. It was hundreds of tons of American bombs, carried by the largest bomber fleet the world had ever assembled. The first B-29 opened its bomb bay doors. Metal groaned. Freezing wind blasted into the plane. Below, Tokyo sprawled like a vast maze of shadows and rooftops. Bombs away! The payload fell. A silent drop through icy darkness. Then, a thundering bloom of fire lit the horizon, bright enough to see from 30 miles away. But this was only the beginning. One by one, the Superfortresses unleashed their loads. They didn't dive, they didn't slow. They moved in chilling, mechanical coordination. Row after row, wave after wave, cutting across the night like a steel storm. Within minutes, the eastern districts of Tokyo ignited. Flames jumped from house to house, feeding on wood, paper, lacquer, fuel, cables, anything that could burn. Japanese firefighters rushed into the streets, but they were overwhelmed instantly. Hoses burst, engines melted. Men collapsed from heat that felt like opening the door to a furnace. The people of Tokyo ran into the streets screaming, clutching children, blankets, buckets, anything that might save them. But there was no safety. Above them, the B-29s continued their run, their wings glowing orange from the reflection of the inferno below. Meanwhile, Japan's Air Force, the once feared might of the imperial military, struggled to respond. Pilots sprinted toward what few planes remained. Aircraft struggled to start. Some engines sputtered. Others never turned over at all. Those who managed to take off faced the unimaginable. B-29s too high for their guns, too fast for their fighters, too coordinated to break. One pilot, flying an outdated Ki-43 with cracked instrument glass, climbed desperately toward the formation. He leveled his aircraft for a shot, then watched helplessly as the Superfortresses climbed effortlessly out of range. "We cannot reach them!" His voice cracked over the radio as flames from Tokyo reflected off his canopy. It was the moment Japan's pilots finally understood. They had lost the sky. Back over Tokyo, entire districts were being erased. The firestorm twisted into a rotating pillar, a tornado of flame rising thousands of feet into the air. It sucked oxygen from the streets, pulling people off their feet and into the vortex. Some B-29 pilots cried into their masks as they saw the inferno spreading across miles. They weren't immune to the horror, but they also knew this was war Japan had started, and this was war Japan would now have to face. By 3:28 a.m., the last bombs fell. The formation arced away in a massive turn, engines howling as they climbed toward safety and home. Behind them, Tokyo glowed like a sunken volcano, a ring of fire stretching beyond sight, smoke climbing into the stratosphere. 334 B-29s had flown through one of the most heavily defended regions of the Japanese Empire, and they had done so with devastating success. Pilots glanced over their shoulders at the burning capital. No fighters chased them. No anti-aircraft guns reached them. Japan's Air Force had been exposed, broken not by numbers, but by reality. The United States had built a machine of war Japan could no longer challenge. And tonight, that truth burned across the sky. Dawn broke slowly over the Pacific, casting pale orange light across the wings of the returning B-29s. The men on board were exhausted, eyes red, oxygen masks chafing their faces, hands trembling from hours of tension. But as they approached their island bases, something remarkable happened. Ground crews, mechanics, cooks, medics, clerks, poured out onto the flight lines. They stared upward, shielding their eyes. They counted the returning planes. 15, 20, 50, 100, 200. Aircraft after aircraft appeared over the horizon until the sky looked like a highway of silver giants returning from another world. It seemed impossible. No mission of this scale had ever returned with so few losses. When the first bomber touched down, a wave of applause broke out on the tarmac. These were hardened men, war-weary, disciplined, stoic. But even they couldn't hide their shock. The mission had succeeded on a level no one had predicted. Inside one of the B-29s, a gunner removed his headset and whispered, "We flew into hell and came back with only smoke on our wings." But while the Americans celebrated survival, Tokyo was unrecognizable. The sun revealed a city carved open by fire. Neighborhoods had vanished. Entire blocks reduced to blackened ash. Streets had become rivers of charcoal. Iron frames of factories twisted like melted wire. Trains sat frozen on rails that had buckled from extreme heat. Survivors stumbled through the devastation, coughing, crying, barefoot on smoldering debris. Mothers searched for children. Fathers searched for homes, workplaces, anything familiar. But for many, nothing remained. Officials of the Japanese government moved through the ruins in stunned silence. Some carried notebooks and maps, but they hardly used them. Numbers didn't capture what they saw. Words failed. This wasn't damage. This wasn't destruction. This was erasure. Military officers held emergency meetings underground. Their faces were grim, their uniforms covered in soot. Reports came in from every direction. Anti-aircraft guns overheated. Radar stations overwhelmed. Pilots unable to climb to B-29 altitude. Interceptors shot down or mechanically failed. The truth was unavoidable. Japan had lost its ability to defend its skies. One senior officer slammed his fist on the table. "These bombers fly where they want, when they want." "We have no answer," his voice echoed through the bunker. No one argued. Meanwhile, far out over the Pacific, American pilots removed their gear and finally breathed normal air again. Some collapsed on the ground beside their aircraft, the adrenaline draining from their bodies. Others walked silently to the mess hall, too shaken to speak. But there was one emotion they all shared: relief. Not just because they survived, but because they now understood the impact of the mission. They had seen Tokyo burn. They had seen no fighters chase them. They had felt no real threat from Japan's defenses. One pilot wrote in his journal that evening, "This wasn't just a bombing, it was a test of strength, and Japan didn't have any left." American commanders gathered that same night to review mission footage and radio logs. Every piece of data told the same story. Japan's Air Force had reached a breaking point. Fuel shortages, damaged factories, inexperienced pilots, a shrinking supply of aircraft. Against all this stood the B-29, faster, higher, stronger, and supported by an industrial giant Japan simply couldn't match. From that night forward, the skies over Japan would belong not to the empire, but to the United States. The Tokyo mission wasn't just a raid, it was a revelation, a moment when the world saw the truth. Japan could still fight on land. Japan could still fight at sea. But Japan could no longer fight in the air. And without the sky, without the ability to shield its cities, its factories, its supply lines, defeat was no longer a possibility. It was a countdown. The flames over Tokyo had illuminated something far more powerful than destruction. They had revealed the end of Japanese air superiority and the beginning of the final chapter of the war. Night fell over the Pacific once again, but this time the darkness felt different, calmer, quieter, because everyone, from the ground crews to the high command, now understood what the mission over Tokyo truly meant. It wasn't just a bombing run. It wasn't just 334 B-29s reaching their target. It was a moment where an entire empire realized it could no longer protect itself. Inside a dimly lit war room on Saipan, American commanders gathered around a long table covered in maps and reconnaissance photos. General Curtis LeMay stood with his arms crossed, staring at the imagery of Tokyo taken just hours earlier. Entire districts, commercial, industrial, residential, had been turned into geometric patterns of ash. One analyst cleared his throat, barely able to speak. "Sir, this level of destruction in a single operation, we've never seen anything like it." LeMay didn't blink. "We won't stop now," he said. "Not until Japan can't fight another day. And deep down, every man in that room understood. This wasn't confidence. This was certainty. Across the ocean in Japan, the Imperial High Command met in a bunker thick with stale air and dread. Their uniforms were immaculate, but their eyes were empty. Generals spoke in hushed tones, afraid to say out loud what everyone already knew. A naval officer unfolded a crumpled report. "Interceptors unable to reach altitude." Another whispered, "Factories at 40% output." A third added, "Pilot losses exceed replacements." Silence settled like dust. Then, for the first time in the war, a senior Japanese general said what his superiors feared most. "If the Americans can do this once, they can do it again." That sentence hung in the air like smoke, and he was right. As days passed, the mission's impact grew clearer. Long-range reconnaissance revealed that Japan's aviation industry was crippled beyond quick repair. Rubber shortages stalled aircraft assembly lines. Aluminum stockpiles nearly vanished. Fuel supply chains were collapsing from submarine attacks. Japan still had soldiers. Japan still had ships. But a modern war couldn't be fought without air power. And the sky, once Japan's symbol of ambition, now belonged entirely to the U.S. Army Air Forces. Meanwhile, on the islands where the B-29 crews lived, life returned to routine. The bombers were refueled, rearmed, patched, and prepared for the next mission. But the crews carried a new kind of confidence. They had flown into the heart of Japan's capital and faced almost no resistance. One gunner said it best. "We used to fear the Japanese Zero. Now we never even see one." For a nation that built its identity on aviation courage, this was devastating. In Washington, intelligence officials examined the after-action reports with a mixture of astonishment and gravity. A single operation had revealed the truth that many had suspected but few had been able to prove. Japan could not win the air war. Not now, not ever again. The implications were enormous. It meant American bombers would continue pounding factories, depots, shipyards, and transport lines with increasing ferocity. It meant Japan's remaining islands would be isolated and starved of resources. It meant the war's internal clock had begun ticking toward an inevitable end. And for the Japanese leadership, this realization brought something they had not felt in years: fear. By early morning, telegrams were sent across the empire. Urgent calls for new pilots, requests for spare engines, appeals for emergency fuel shipments. But nothing changed. Nothing could. Japan's skies were lost. And once a nation loses the sky, every battle beneath it is already doomed. The 334 B-29 mission over Tokyo would be remembered not just for its scale, not just for its destruction, but for what it exposed. A nation fighting bravely, but fighting blind. A military built with pride, but crumbling under industrial reality. An empire once feared, now unable to defend its own capital. As the smoke over Tokyo finally cleared, the world saw what the Japanese High Command had seen in that bunker. The war was no longer about who fought harder. It was about who could keep fighting at all. And after that night, Japan's ability to do so had vanished into the ashes of its own capital, proving, unmistakably, that the air war was over long before the surrender ever came.